Hello everybody and welcome to this look at the Union for Armoured Clash. Today I'm going to be examining what you get in the Union faction battle group and how they perform on the battlefield, and one reason why you may want to build certain troops over others for your force. So you can see in front of me I have an array of miniatures. I've got everything built from one of the infantry regiments, and then everything built from one of the armoured regiments. There are options within these, and then it's really up to you how you decide to build them when you're putting your force together. And then I've got the majestic Lakota land train here in shiny resin surrounding the whole flank. So let's get into it, and we'll start off with the most important thing, your infantry. When you're building any armoured clash force for any of the factions, you always have mainstay units. Sometimes they can be core troops, sometimes they can be core armoured fighting vehicles like tanks. Depending on the battle group you're assembling, you have the option of taking different types and also bolstering one of those units of your mainstay beyond the size of the battle you're normally going to play. So everything here is for a basic unit, which is the smallest fieldable force you can use in a skirmish game or in a battle, which is the sort of medium-sized game. Cataclysmic games are your biggest, where you can really go ham and triple the size of the units that are available. So first things first, we have our federal troopers, the Union riflemen, seen throughout the territories of the Americas. So with your Union troopers, they are your standard infantry. They're used to take objectives, protect objectives, garrison buildings, things like that. They've got a relatively decent discipline of 6. They've got a range of up to 12 inches, so not terrible, not fantastic. They're a standard rifleman. They will do the job that is in front of them to the best of their ability. They do have some benefits, mind you. The standard battle group you can form will have a faction-specific or nation-specific rule attached to it. And if you're building the core force, which allows you to take support battle groups, the special rule you have is let them have it, boys. And in that you can activate a unit. They get to attack, and when they attack, all strikes count as 2 hits, as well as your critical strikes counting as 2 hits. So they do one tremendous volley of fire, then they become suppressed at the end of it. But for one glorious shining moment, they are magnificent. And that is what you have with the riflemen here. Next up, the other unit of riflemen that you can take are the Pacifier heavy infantry. These are a little bit different from your standard riflemen in that they've got higher discipline. They've got a bit better armor, which comes across in their discipline rather than in their defense value. But their gun is a shorter range weapon. It has a 8-inch range, but it does a ton of fire compared to the riflemen. So you're looking at 7 dice compared to 4 dice at that closer range. But where they really shine is they are a shock troop that can go into buildings. So they can assault into buildings without the opponent getting the defender bonus, or they can move in and garrison in the same turn without needing to take a separate action. So they really are your hard-hitting force. And being shock troops in the melee, when they get right in there, they get a bonus against light troops. So if you come up against other infantry, instead of getting 3 attacks in melee, they're going to get 5 attacks. So they are a punchier force, a bit more expensive, and obviously less stands than you would see with the federal riflemen. But both of these units share a trait in that they are parent units. And this is specific currently to the Union. None of the other factions have it. When you pick a parent unit for your force from the order of battle, you can take up to a set amount of fire teams as support. In both cases here, they can take 3 fire teams. And this leans into the idea that the Union are tech heavy, but manpower weak. They've come out of the Civil War having suffered devastating losses, and so they've had to replace a lot of troopers on the battlefield either with automata or by using advanced tech advanced weaponry that some of the other nations don't currently use. So this is kind of like that. When you buy one of these units, they can have up to 3, in the case of both the Pacifier and the Rifleman, fire teams. And these are the little 2-man teams you see here. So there's a couple of different types. We'll start off with the Rocketeers, or Rocket Men. So the Rocketeers, they're a little 2-man fire team, so just 2 stands. Every stand is a unit within the game. So the Rocketeers, they have a decent range, about 14 inches against other light troops that are on the table, whether cavalry or infantry. However, they also have a 20-inch range against aerial units. So things like the Spitfire Rocketeers coming in, or if they add any flyers in the future, these are good light anti-aircraft that can be brought to support a parent unit. So it's always nice to have a bit of ack alongside your actual units whenever people may be whizzing around in the skyline. It helps prevent people from coming down behind you and absolutely decimating your riflemen or your pacifiers as they move along. Next up, we have our Federal Gatling gun team. So again, these stands are all 2-man sort of units. But with these, they've got a slightly extended range. Compared to the Riflemen, for example, if they were a fire team supporting them, they've got a 14-inch range against light troops. And they also have 4 dice of fire. So they have almost the equivalent firepower of that rifle unit at a longer range, but only in a fraction of the miniatures on the table. So you've got these little units, and you can mix and match between them. So you could take potentially 3 Gatling fire teams. You get obviously 1 set per regiment set, per regiment sprues, if you want to think of them like that. But if you've got multiple regiments, then you could go, well, I'll have 3 Gatling teams with my rifleman section and make a really solid defensive wall of fire to protect an objective. It's a good way of doing it. The final fire team, which is available to both the pacifiers and the riflemen, is the UR-45E. So these are automata, and they are arc troopers. So like all automata, they don't need to worry about discipline tests. So they're fairly robust. They have a short range, 10 inches, but their damage, their arc weaponry is excellent against both light and heavy targets. So they're a bit multi-use. Your Gatlings, your rockets, great against light, terrible against heavy, can't engage at all. So if you're worried about having some anti-armor support with you, then go for the UR-31E fire team. It's a devastating short-range attack that will make anybody think twice about possibly assaulting you, or maybe even sending some automata of their own in. Up next, we have some cavalry. In this case, it's the first sort of choice you have whenever you come to build your force. In this case, we have a set of 5 bases, 5 stands to make your regiment, but they can be built in one of 2 ways. So on the left here, I have my Iron Horse Cavalry. These are light cav. They've got a relatively quick movement, 10 inches. They've got a equivalent weapon that the riflemen have, so they're going to be firing against light targets, and they're all right at doing the sort of vanguard and scouting job, getting in and trying to stop other people from getting to objectives first or contesting. Very good in that respect. The other type of model you can make from the kit are on this side, and these are our Blazer Heavy Cavalry. They are slower moving. They don't have vanguard. They do have an extended weapon range, which is a bit punchier. So depending on what way you want to go, they're both very good options. With what you get in the set, obviously you can make multiple units, so you might want to go a bit 7th Cavalry, perhaps. Go for a lot of the light vanguard, Iron Horse, and maybe not worry so much about the Blazers, because on the armoured sprue there is another set of cav who do the hard-hitting heavy cavalry job quite well. Okay, after the cavalry, there is the Hotchkiss field guns. This is a infantry support weapon, so not heavy artillery, but the sort of artillery that a regiment would bring with them to offer some support. And I quite like the Hotchkiss field guns. One, because they look like giant revolvers. Like somebody's decided, the Colt, it's a fantastic gun. Why do we not just make that but giant? But another thing it has going for it is its rate of fire and its capacity to damage both light and heavy targets. So it has a 20-inch range. It has 5 dice against light. It has 4 dice against heavy. So practically the same gun against both targets, which is makes it very versatile and a mainstay of any sort of list where you want to have a protected flank and you're not really worried what comes against them, because the Hotchkiss will do a lot of damage in both cases, regardless of who is coming your way. The final thing you will find on your infantry regiment is the travelling trucks. So we have two variants again. We have the standard vehicle here, which is the Ironhide. The Ironhide has got a transport capacity of 3. So if you've got 2 of them, they can take up to 6 stands, which means you'll need 2 for a full rifle unit. Obviously, it means they're going to be leaving their fire teams behind unless you have some more. They come with twin Gatlings on the front, which means they're good defensive with a bit of range against light troops. So you can spray and pray before you get into combat with your riflemen. However, if you want a bit more punch, you can go with the Lamplighter. The Lamplighter, compared to the Ironhide, has got 1 less capacity, which means good for the pacifiers, but you'll need more of these if you want to carry your rifle platoons around the place. However, it does come with a very short flamethrower. It only goes out to 6 inches, so you're going to have to get up close and personal. However, you can engage both heavy and light targets with it, which means it one-ups the Ironhide. Yes, you can carry less because you've got a big load of fuel in the back, but if you plan on running into some FEs or maybe automata or some other walker kicking around the place, want to weaken them before you get the shock troops out the back and into their face with the pacifiers, then the Lamplighter is a good versatile way to go, but does have a very, very short distance on it. So you're going to have to think carefully about which ones you want to build, unless you fancy breaking out the magnets. So that is the light side of the things with your infantry regiment. The back of this is our armoured, and you can see there's a variety of mechs, some cavalry, the big tanks, and also heavy artillery pieces. So we'll start off with the main battle tanks, which is a nice place to go. Multiple variants can be built from the sprues in the box. I think there's 4 potential variants in here. I've built 2. One is the Rolling Thunder, which is your main battle tank. This one here. And the Rolling Thunder is, as you would expect, a solid piece of kit with a big gun on it. It can do light, it can do heavy. It's a stodgy, solid piece of kit. There are, like I say, a variety of other types with various weaponry on them, whether they're sort of mortars or bombards or artillery pieces that are moving around. However, the other I chose to build here is nicknamed the Reaper. It's a bit different for one particular reason. It comes with an arc gun on it. So your arc cannon has got a very short range. It does an incredible amount of damage to anything it hits. And if anybody gets within about 3 feet of the hull, it does an incredible amount of damage to them as well. So it makes it a very viable shock melee piece of kit as well. Unfortunately, it means you can't be crewed by humans, because it has a tendency to melt every human that comes too close to it, even with insulation inside. So it actually is an automated tank. It means you are slightly restricted because you're no longer going to be able to capture objectives, but you can contest them with automata. But it also means you're never taking discipline tests, and it doesn't matter if bits fall off their tank as they get in there. Very solid battle tanks, regardless of what flavour you're going to build and what weaponry you're going to have. Obviously, there are plenty of options in there if you feel you need a bit more punch in one way or another. But I do think the Reaper, the Automata Arc Cannon version, is a great way of going with it. Although your Rolling Thunder is a mainline battle tank, so you have the potential to boost that, to bolster it before the game starts and have it as a double-sized unit for the game you're playing. And just on that respect, it may be worth your while thinking about that in and of itself. Next up, we have our Iron Eagles, and this is, like I said, the alternative unit of cavalry. Unlike the Iron Horse and the Blazer, these are also automata. They have the same move as the Blazer, but again, they're not taking the discipline tests. They've got a slightly shorter weapon range, but it's much punchier. You have possibly a better version of the heavy cavalry. You're not giving away anything in so far as speed. You've got a higher defense than the humans, so they will survive a bit longer, and they're not taking discipline tests, so it's taking longer for people to chip away at them. I think these are probably going to be my preferable go-to for heavy cav over the Blazer. Keep the infantry cavalry as Iron Horse for the speed and for vanguard to move them around and capture objectives, and these are just a solid second wave to come in and punch through anything that's sitting on an objective and do it very, very well. And you're not going to have to worry about dealing with unnecessary losses. So you could potentially even push them out onto a flank because you're not worried about being in command range because they can't take advantage of your commander anyway. So shock cav coming in from the flanks, being ridden by automata, fantastic way of doing it. Okay, so our heavy artillery then. Again, two potentials here. First off, we have the Armstrong heavy artillery, which is your sort of standard artillery piece. 45-inch range, good, powerful shot that will do a serious amount of damage to heavy targets, the likes of tanks. Not great against light targets, as you would imagine, but you can reach out and touch somebody from a considerable distance with the Armstrong, which is always a good way to go. Big guns often win games. However, if you fancy a bit more power in your punch, there is the Moab Thermobaric mortar, a 6-shooter of infinite jest, and this considerably shorter range. However, you're looking at something like a 28-inch range. It has an 8-inch minimum, so you can't target people up close and personal because it is a mortar, but the Thermobaric mortar's fire ignores concealed, ignores bonuses for garrison. It has the torrent special rule, so it will just hammer through defended obstacles and buildings. If you're looking to pick some infantry out of a building, then that is a great way of doing it. And depending on the sort of games you play with your friends, your table setup, you may have more terrain that's easily garrisoned, or you may find that you need something that packs a bit of a punch against concealed infantry, because especially with the reduced numbers that you look at with the Union compared to some of the other forces, you may want to weaken any sort of strategically held area before you push your infantry in there to take it. So that makes it an exceptional piece of kit for that. The Armstrong, yes, it's a great long-range weapon. It will do a lot of damage against any sort of heavy target from distance, but you have the potential to do that up close and personal with things like the Reaper, or use the Rolling Thunder battle tank, even the Hotchkiss. You have enough anti-armor in here that I think I probably would prefer the Thermobaric for the Moab instead. So it's a choice, and like most things, it's the choice of a new generation. So worth contemplating which way you're going to go with those. Finally, we have a couple of different mechs. So you have one unit of 4, but there are 2 options once again. Okay, so we have our UR-45 heavy mechs. They are once again automata, as you may imagine. They are also equipped with a massive grabby claw, so they are good in melee, and well, they're fairly devastating in melee, and they have a decent range firepower with that Gatling gun again, so they can reach out and touch people 14 inches away. However, if you fancy something a bit punchier, but less punchy, you can have the UR-45E. These mechs do not have a melee weapon, so their close combat capability is significantly reduced. However, they do have arc weaponry, which means they will carve through human flesh and armor like butter, regardless of which way around you want to do it. Options once again with your build, depending what you want to go for. The urge to load heavy onto arc weaponry is big with me, so having everything be very punchy up close and personal, and then just send forward waves of the cavalry, have your Iron Horse and Iron Eagle as essentially the initial wave to distract and weaken your opponent, and then by that stage you've got all your arc weaponry up close and personal, and they can just carve through your opponent willy-nilly. So those are your UR-45 mechs, which are absolutely cracking. And speaking of cracking, the pièce de résistance, the Lakota land train. And this piece of kit is a big resin brute. You can magnetize it if you so desire, and there are options with your carriages. So with the Lakota here, it plays a little differently from some of the other super heavies that are available for the Crown and the Empire. You have, in fact, in this case, something that can be fielded in smaller games. However, depending on the size of game you're playing, you will have additional carriages added to your engine. So we'll start with the engine itself for the Lakota. You may notice it has no wheels. because as Doc Brown told us, where we're going, we won't need roads, or in this case, rails. It is a hover, so it treats water and rubbly ground as open terrain. It can just go wherever it wants to go. Obviously, it's a bit ponderous. There are restrictions in its movement, but the train has a lot going on for it. As you can see, it is equipped with a few defensive weapons on the front of it, coming in a variety of archy flavours. But then, depending on the game size you're playing, you can add one carriage to it if you're playing a basic game. You can add 2 carriages to it if you are playing a battle. And if you're playing the largest of all games, your cataclysmic affairs, you can have actually up to 4 carriages on it in any configuration you want. We'll just have a quick look at those configurations themselves. So our Breckenridge, which is the first carriage type here, comes with 2 spankingly massive guns, which can reach out and touch someone up to 32 inches away. It is very punchy against heavy troop types, but also it will do the job against light if it needs to. Important to note, with the carriages, they don't have a standard front, rear and flank arcs. In fact, they have 2 fronts, and the fronts in this case come out the sides. So if the guns are facing that way, that is front firing. If the guns are facing the other way, they are front firing. And the flanks are actually the part where they couple to the next carriage or to the engine. So that's our Breckenridge. Next up, we have the Houston Firebase. Houston Firebase is something similar to the Moab Thermobaric. It has a short-range mortar on board. Again, something that I can fire out a rake of devastating indirect fire shots at, particularly good at digging infantry out as you're chewing around the tabletop. So very cute again. And the last we have is the New Haven. And the New Haven has a ton of sponsons on it. So it's got very short range, as you might expect, and good against light troops, more defensive. However, it does have a transport capacity of 8, which makes this an interesting carriage. Like I say, when you're putting these together, you can do them in any order and any configuration, depending on the size of game you're playing. So this can be your overall commander for your force, and it can be driving around the battlefield, doing a lot of fun and games to everyone. However, it has an interesting little aside, and that is when you're playing, you can decouple carriages at any point, and you can decouple from any section. So you can choose to decouple right in the middle here. The engine will move off next turn or this turn, because I think you decouple and then you do your move, leaving these carriages behind. This turn they get to fire as part of the train's activation, but next turn they fire as a separate unit. And you could potentially decouple from the back to the front, so you could leave small fortifications with guns on them around various places. For example, your Lakota could do a tour of the battlefield, dropping one of these fortified armoured carriages at every scenario objective that you're looking to capture or that you have captured. And all of a sudden you've deployed little strong points then that your opponent has to deal with, along with whatever other infantry or unit is actually holding that objective. So there's a ton of potential with these land trains. It will be fascinating to see how people actually play with them on the tabletop, because the idea of decoupling and using them as individual fortresses on the table is great, but at the same time using them as that massive, huge bank of guns. And like I say, you can roll out nothing but McHenrys or Breckenridges or New Havens. So you could have a potentially 8 per carriage, up to 4 carriages. You could have 32 stands with a ton of short-ranged anti-light defensive capabilities. Have that go up the table and disgorge your entire army onto your opponent's half of the board or deep into enemy lines and really play havoc with his back ranks, because all of a sudden he has to worry about all of your infantry coming that way. Likewise, you could go absolutely ham with all of the big heavy hitters on it instead, go with the McHenrys and the Breckenridges. There's a ton of fun to be had with this land train. So the Lakota is really different from how other land ships we've seen with the Empire and Crown perform. It doesn't have maybe the sheer volume of hit and defensive capabilities that they do by themselves, but the versatility of the build when you come to actually put it on the table is massive. Obviously, if you want to do various type of loadouts, you may have to pick up a couple of the land trains, then swap carriages in, swap carriages out. But even then, with the carriages themselves, the couplings have been actually designed to take a 2mm by 1mm magnet. So you can actually stick them together quite easily and keep them all rocking around. You can't overextend your coupling whenever you're actually making your move, so you are required to keep it connected as the model is, so you've got a limited amount of swing on it. So that means with a long train and the reduced movement capabilities, you may find yourself in a difficult position where you're going to have to try and reverse. So the maneuverability is the big Achilles heel for the Lakota, but if push comes to shove, decouple a couple of carriages and just plow on and let your opponent worry about what you've left behind blocking the road for whatever he has incoming. So there you go. That is the Union battle group and a flavour of how you can put your force together. Obviously the option is yours, but with something like this you do have the potential to bolster either your Federal riflemen or your Rolling Thunder mainline battle tanks to be a size larger than the game you're playing. So you've the potential in here to play some interesting smaller skirmish games, especially with those fire teams, and then obviously get stuck into some of the big battles, which is where Armoured Clash really shines. Let me know what you think below, and we'll be back soon.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.